Today I'd like to talk about adjusting your oboe. If you were to take time to count the amount of adjustment screws on your average oboe, mostly it would exceed the number of tone holes in the instrument, which is a pretty good indicator that these adjustment screws are relatively important. So over time, when you play the instrument, the wood changes, the cork changes, and sometimes it gets out of adjustment. Tabito used to say he'd like to have a minute of suction in the top joint, and you get that by covering the holes in the bottom, seeing how long you can hold with your lip. Now I can't get a minute, I could probably get 20 seconds, but it does affect the tone, and I can hear players when they're playing instruments that don't cover. It's just not very good. The tone, you're not getting the full amount of tone that you should be getting, and then of course some of your notes in the bottom end won't speak very well. So this is what I do. First I'll talk about screwdrivers, okay? Now your oboe probably comes with something like this. They call it a jeweler's screwdriver. I never use these. I have dozens of them and I never use them because there's just too much motion. And I can't really get a good feel for turning the screw and how much. I would recommend that you go out and you buy, let's say, a screwdriver like this. A good size to get would be either a 3/32 or a 5/64, which is a little smaller if you can't get to the screw. But for the most part, 3/32 works pretty well. Get something that's solid with a handle. This is like a metric equivalent. This is a German made. So you can feel when you're turning the screw, you can feel how much you're turning the screw. And you want to turn it very little. Now I have this one here, which is a Pittsburgh Harbor Freight screwdriver, and it has a big handle, so I can feel how little I need to turn it. I remember John Mack adjusting my instrument once. He had a screwdriver that was probably this long with a handle on it like this, and he turned it maybe that much, if that, which made all the difference in the world. Little movements go a long way. Now I would recommend getting some ungummed cigarette paper, and what I do is I'll take the knife or a razor blade and I will make roughly a 30 to 45 angle cut, so at the bottom is a few millimeters wide, and I'll give you enough space to work with. In starting to adjust, I'll show you which ones for me I do first, and that is relationship between the A and the B flat and the G, or this would be the B flat and the C. So these two first, and then I do these two. The adjustment screws for this are right here, okay, which lines up with this, and the adjustment screw for this is of course off of the end here. But this also affects both of them. Interpretations of this to the point where this is barely even closing, and for modern instruments you don't have to worry so much about that. In the old days, many would sometimes, as Genovese told me, this would have a lot of play right here, this key. But that's because in the old days the B naturals were pretty flat. They weren't very high, and so if it leaked a little bit on the B natural, that was okay. It brought the pitch up a bit. You don't want that in a modern day instrument. The instruments are much more in tune than they used to be, and you're not going to have that kind of a problem, really. What I do is I'll rest it on my knee and I'll press the bridge key, which is down here. See this? Connected to that. To open it. Put this in here, and then I'll lightly press to see which one is stronger. And I mean lightly. Okay. And then I'll press a little stronger to see. When you press lightly, sometimes this pad will press before this one. You don't want that. For the most part, the big pads need to be stronger than the little ones, especially with skin. Now I'm doing cork pads here, and I do it several times just to get the right feel of it. But this one's pretty good. Now let's move down to the next one. Slide that under there. A little stronger. This one's also very good. Not much to do there. That seems okay. Let's move down further down the instrument. This is important because you have this bridge key here to the A flat. It's important that this key closes before this comes on contact, this screw comes in contact here. Because if it doesn't, your bottom joint's going to leak. And I've seen that happen quite often. Now this barely makes any contact at all. Also, make sure that the bridge key is well aligned. This is one of the most important things I do when I check the instrument, is to make sure that the bridge key here is aligned. Now let's do this again. Forgive this awkward. Well, that closes well. We're moving down the instrument to the next two, which are equally as important as the top two. And that's between the E key and this little key here, which is what, for the F sharp perhaps? That relationship is important. Now what happens sometimes is people will want to push this key down quite a bit, but you don't want to do that because you run into problems. The E is connected to other things, and it's important that the E is the strongest down here. And that might be a little too strong for it. So I'll have to loosen this up a bit, because this has to be less than this. And you find the screw and you turn it very, very little. And that was very little. Yes, now that E key is strong. And this is just a little lighter. Also, when you do the D key down here, you want that to close also, but not too strong. Some people tighten this a bit too much. If anything, this D key has got to be very strong, and it is. Now let's do the F key here. This can be troublesome, this key here, because if you have play a low D and this doesn't cover when you press the E key, it's not going to work very well. And I think this could be just a tad more. It's one of those situations where it's got to cover, but it can't cover too tightly. So here's the screw, and I'm just going to turn it just a tad, maybe a minute or 2 minutes. Think of a clock, and I'll turn it 1 minute. And that's a little better. That does help. As long as the E is strong, and it is. And this still might be a little too strong, but it's better. Okay, now when we get down to these keys here, I'll press the E flat key with my finger up here, you can see, and then the C sharp key. And I'll want that C sharp to close. And it does. It's relatively strong. The C must be strong, and it is. If not, you would adjust this screw right here, so that this key closes and is not leaking. Alright? And the same for the next one, which is the C sharp. I'll hold that here and then press the D key. I'm sorry, the B natural key in the left hand. This is especially important for tombow. This doesn't work. The low B doesn't want to come out when you're playing the C sharp. We all know how dangerous that can be. This thing here. There we go. And I think that I might have to tighten it. And that seems okay. But however, yeah, that's okay. You do want this lighter. The big keys have to be stronger. And these are all cork, by the way. And skin is different. Okay. This isn't so bad, though. I'm surprised because it's been sitting around. I'll try these again. That's stronger. That's weaker. Stronger and weaker. Now we'll adjust the relationship between these two, which is also relatively important, and that's by pressing the C key and just placing it under and letting it sit. And this should be a little less. The top one should be a little less, and this one is stronger. And this is relativity, right? So the tolerances are very fine, and you have to do this many times in order to get a feel for it. But I would suggest that you try, because sometimes things can be blatantly out. Oh, sorry, isn't in bad shape. It's okay.